good afternoon to everyone. And we thank you for joining this afternoon's workshop that's being led by Ms. Sharon Saylor. Now, the title of our workshop is Embracing Inclusion in the Language We Teach. And before we turn it over to Sharon, I just want to acknowledge again that Sharon is one of our happy retirees. After 29 years of service in our English department. And I understand they're really hoping, Sharon, that you're going to come back and teach English 2270. Okay, that seems to be the deal.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, this afternoon we've got a great group online. We now have 31 participants. And I believe Sharon would love for this to be a lively session. So if you have questions, please put those in the chat box. I will be managing those. And we're going to turn this over now to Sharon Saylor, our instructor for the afternoon. Hello, Sharon.
All right. Welcome, everyone. I am thrilled to see you all. I love teaching in the virtual environment because I can see the faces of people I've been missing so much. So what we're going to do today is to talk about how the inclusive language is something that gives us so many benefits. And here is my email address. If you have any questions at all, send me an email because I am always willing to speak to you. Now, oh, here we go. Sometimes the technology has a mind of its own. Let's go back to the, there's one more slide that I want to begin with. Okay, let's go. So the question is, how can we embrace the cultures and the languages of all of our students and at the same time prepare them for a professional career where they will need to speak and write the standard edited English? And the answer is this slide. We can embrace inclusion. And what I have been doing in grammar class and in the other classes that I taught as a full-timer was to bring in a variety of texts, not just the ones that are in the literary canon, and using many dialects, styles, levels of formality. And I am not the only one in charge of bringing in text. In my grammar class especially, I have sent the students out to their own language places, and they have brought in poems, scripture songs, all sorts of wonderful things. One person's into astrology, and so she brought an astrological forecast in. And so language in all its variety is the subject of our class. And then purpose and audience are the yardstick, are the way that we judge whether language use is effective or not. So if we were speaking in well-formed sentences and paragraphs and writing a text, the person at the other end would say, that's crazy. Why are you doing that? So you have to think about your purpose in communication and the person who's going to be at the other end of it. Okay, and so we still teach the effective use of standard edited English because this is the lingua franca. This is the common language throughout the world. And so we would be doing our students a disservice if we didn't teach that. However, the big difference is it's not the only language. It's not the only way to communicate. And once you open the door to all of these other ways of communication, wonderful things happen. So let's see whether my technology is going to work. Okay. There we go. Now, grammar instruction in the past was pretty limited to what we call prescriptive grammar. And in the past, it was play by the rules or else you get red marks on your paper. And so we only taught the rules for speaking and writing in standard English. And the way to do it was worksheets. This sentences were not real world sentences. And so the students would zoom through the worksheets after the teacher told them what the rule was and feel very comfortable with their understanding. It would also show up on the test. Students would make 100 on the test. And then they started writing, and the same students who scored A's on the test were not able to follow the rules in their own writing. And what they wound up with was a paper that bled, red marks. And so this kind of situation was what happened into the 80s. And the National Council of Teachers of English did a small study to see whether their standalone grammar instruction worked. And the study said, no, not only does it not work, it also may be detrimental to students' writing ability because it takes away from the writing time. And so the time was a time of limited funds. And so the school superintendent said, oh, good, something we can cut. And so the grammar programs were discontinued in many public schools. And I know this for a fact. The grammar textbooks lots of times wound up in the dumpsters. And so it was a kind of situation where students were taught to write, and anything that they wrote was accepted and valued, which is good. But the grammar part of their writing was not emphasized. And what you'll see is happening with grammar instruction today is that we've learned how to teach the right use of language and to value the students' opinions and their voice. Okay? And here's something too. College teacher education programs did not teach their students how to teach grammar because they weren't going to use it. And also, they didn't emphasize the grammar principles. And so what happened was, let me get, okay, was that, okay, there was a tragedy. 30 years without systematic grammar study in many public schools. Catholic schools were fine. They continued to diagram sentences, and to teach grammar. And what is the second part of the tragedy is that grammar was taken out of the school systems while a new kind of grammar was being developed, and a new way of looking at language through Noam Chomsky, who pioneered the study in linguistics. And so he and other people developed something called linguistic grammar. And the fundamental concept is that there is a body of internal grammar which is located in the neural pathways of our brain. And a child begins hearing language even before birth, and by 5 is very adept at understanding language. It takes a little bit longer to speak in compound complex sentences, but so we've got this internal grammar. And then there are 2 different ways of thinking about our external grammar. The prescriptive, which is the body of rules that we use in order to speak and write in formal language, and the descriptive grammar, which is any kind of language that we use. So the pendulum began to move back towards grammar instruction with No Child Left Behind, because it tested grammar knowledge. And people who were being tested started getting angry at their teachers and said, I scored low on this test because I wasn't given grammar instruction. You know? And then with the Common Core curriculum, it mandated that students demonstrate grammar knowledge. Over half of the standards on the Common Core have to do with grammar, with the knowledge about the language. And then here's one more thing that pulled the pendulum. Corporations were angry at the school systems because their new employees did not know how to use the language, and they didn't know how to compute the math skills. And so they spent billions, and that's not an exaggeration, of dollars on the retraining programs. And they said to the schools, why aren't you doing this? And so the schools listened. And now, let's move to the next one. A necessity to teach grammar again. And the question is, how? We weren't going to go back to the worksheets, but you had to teach the teachers first how to move beyond the rules alone. And this led to the birth of linguistic grammar. We have a national grammar group called the Assembly for Teachers of English Grammar. And our founder, Martha Cohen, was one of the pioneers of teaching English grammar. And in fact, I use her textbook in the grammar classes today. So let us move ahead. Okay. And so grammar study has changed. And this is where we are today. We emphasize purpose and audience as the determiners of effective writing. It's not one way of writing fills all of the purposes and all of the audiences. What you do is you figure out what you want to say and who you want to say it to, and that determines the what is effective or not. And another thing that we do today is we teach descriptive grammar, which is a picture of the language, as well as prescriptive, which is the rules for edited English. We teach them both together. And that way we show the whole picture of language. And another thing we do is that we teach students to switch between many language styles as needed. And we don't specify that one is better than the other. You may recognize the term code switching. It has a bad name in a lot of circles because it has been taught with this implication that your kind of language is not as good as mine. Therefore, you have to learn mine. And there is no kind of judgment that surrounds the code switching. And I prefer the term translation. You translate from one kind of language and style to another one. And then the final thing that we do is that we use mentor texts. And we look at real world language. My students have had such fun bringing in the kinds of language that they enjoy and realizing, oh, gee, we can study this in grammar class too, you know? And so it just opens up a wide variety of, of opportunities to study language. So here's what we do in English 2270. Grammar analysis through the introduction of translating a narrative from one level of formality to the other, enlarging the ideas of prescriptive grammar to include descriptive as well. And then we use the mentor text from a wide variety of sources to analyze language use, only looking at purpose and audience as the way to judge whether the, the language is effective or not. And one of the things that, one of the reasons why I'm here is that I have 14 collaborators on this program. We have been studying these concepts from the beginning of the semester. We had a lively discussion about prescriptive and descriptive grammar, and somebody said, you know, you really need to take this to a larger audience. And I said, well, we're having college enrichment, professional development day soon. Do you think I ought to present? My students said yes. And so I can't present without them. So what I have done, with their permission, of course, is to use their words for mentor checks, for the translating exercises. The things that they have said are things that we all need to keep in mind and to use as we develop our own idea of inclusive language. So grammar, I keep telling my students, is circular. One concept will come back again, and when it comes back, then the students will say, oh, I know this, you know, and you just build a little bit deeper to it. So we start out with prescriptive and descriptive grammar. We do a narrative in two different levels of formality. Students love that. And this is an analysis course. And so what we do is that we analyze everything, you know, and in the discussion boards, the students get to analyze each other's work. And so we look for examples of parts of speech, or and as we use the mentor text. And then we just keep on going. You know, we get a little bit deeper each time we revisit these ideas. So I'm sure you were asking, what is prescriptive grammar? It's the rules. For edited English, it's political. It is the people in charge are the ones who make the rules. The form is usually commands, and it uses things like absolute adverbs and conditional verbs. Never, must, should, always, don't. Okay? And on the other end is descriptive grammar. It's the picture of the English language. Every way that we speak and communicate to each other. In one of the narratives last semester, one of my students was Jamaican, and she said, I put some Jamaican patois into my, and everybody was delighted. They said, oh, that's the way you use it. And she only lapsed into the patois at the high point of her story, which was interesting too. And so descriptive grammar also talks about how the parts of speech work together. Okay? It's non-political. Everyone's equal in descriptive grammar land. The forms are be verbs, action verbs, and the demonstrative mode, statements. Now, your turn. Which is it? Prescriptive or descriptive? The first 50 points on my students' first test have 5 questions, and they have to say prescriptive or descriptive. How about this one? A noun is a word that may be made plural or possessive. Is it prescriptive or descriptive?
Prescriptive.
Yeah, exactly. It is descriptive. It's just the picture of the language, how the language works. How about this one? Never split an infinitive. Star Trek had it wrong. To boldly go where no man goes before.
Well, that's clearly prescriptive because it's telling you how to do something.
Absolutely.
You see, descriptive is how the language is used, while prescriptive is how the language ought to be used.
Oh, that's a good use of the conditional verb.
Yeah, because I'm just saying, I'm not saying prescriptive is how it ought to be used. I'm just saying that's how it's seen.
Yeah, for a particular body of language. And that body of language has many different names. You know, you can call it edited American English. My grammar friends and I like academic English because you learn it in school and then it becomes professional English. So one of the things about this particular sentence, it shows that it's a command. Who's the subject here for never split an infinitive?
The subject is you, or rather, it's understood to be you.
Absolutely, you understood. And here are these absolute adverbs, never. Yeah. What about this one? You must have a subject and a verb to make a complete sentence.
Prescriptive simply because it's telling you this is what you ought to do.
Exactly, the word must. How about this one? This is one of my favorites. As a native Tennessean, y'all come see us here. Prescriptive or descriptive?
No, I'd say it's prescriptive because it's telling you to do something.
Oh, but I'm not saying you gotta do it. And usually when you write an English 1010 paper, you don't use the word y'all. Yeah, unless
that's true. That's true. You know, y'all is a second person plural, and it seems as if English is in dire need of such a word, but y'all is not considered standard.
Exactly. And depending upon what part of the country you go to, there's other second person plurals. Use guys or you'uns, you know. And the language is fascinating, and that's what descriptive grammar looks at. How about this one? Don't use the passive voice. It is weaker than the active voice.
Clearly prescriptive, because we've all been told that.
Exactly. And it's not true. It is something called a myth grammar rule, because the passive voice is very powerful when you want to look at the action itself rather than the person doing the action. Scientific literature, journal articles are full of the passive voice. So this is just sort of an introduction to prescriptive, descriptive grammar. Let's get on. Now, here is something that my students absolutely love. And this was written by one student and analyzed by another. So here's the informal style to a friend. Brian, looking for jobs sucks. I have been everywhere. I've looked at the internet, job boards, other stuff. Every job either pays nothing or wants way more experience than I have. My dad's friend even tried to hook me up, but that didn't go anywhere. I'm running out of money, man. I have to find something quick. So what kind of language is this? How would you describe it?
I describe it as desperate. You know, he's in dire straits.
Exactly, and it's transcribed conversation. And look at what he tells his friend. Well, a respected person. Mr. Smith, thank you for asking about how my search for employment is proceeding. I continue to scour the want ads and interest listings for work that is compatible with my skills and my experience. Thank you for Mr. Jones's contact information. Though he and I had a lengthy discussion about his company and my prospects there, at this time he has no spot for me. He will keep me in mind and I will check back with him regularly. Though it has been tough to find something fulfilling, I know there is a job out there for which I will be a tremendous fit. Thank you again, and I hope to speak with you soon. What a difference in style.
Yes, that sounds more professional. It sounds like he's trying to keep his own emotions out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's trying to maintain well, this is before COVID, social distance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the parts of this assignment was to look at what your classmates have written and say what you see there. And listen to what he said, pretty much what you have said as well. It sounds like you find yourself using more emotion when speaking with a friend and openly voice your free of filter opinions. I also notice the use of slang, using words with more than one meaning, which a lot of us do when we're around someone who's known us long enough to understand which meaning we're most likely using. I also agree that finding a job is super hard in this day and age. You either find someone who knows someone with a job, or you fill in thousands of applications on websites for only one callback. Super hard. And so the connection has been made with the language and what it means. Now, there's another way that we use real world language. I wanted to show you this one because what my student has done is found one of the passages in Toni Morrison's Beloved that she really responds to. And in the beginning, and I'll also give you her reflections on this activity. In the beginning, she wasn't quite sure why it was so strong and so poetic. And so here is the passage, just a short paragraph. There is a loneliness that can be rocked, arms crossed, knees drawn up, holding on this motion, unlike a ship, smooth and contains the rocker. It's an inside kind, wrapped up tight like skin. Then there's the loneliness that roams. No rocking can hold it down. It's alive on its own, a dry and spreading thing that makes the sound of one's own feet going seem to come from a far off place. Wow. Now we're going to play with this. We're going to analyze it with the use of color coding. We did this when we talked about parts of speech. And so there's the same passage, but it is in living color. And what she found is that there were a great deal of nouns. There were 16 nouns here, but there were 20 verbs. And then she looked at the other things as well, the other parts of speech. And this is one thing you do with a mentor text. You look at it and you figure out. And then the final thing you do with a mentor text, what this class, this student did, was to make your own response, your own text, your own essay, using the mentor text as the pattern. So the text itself becomes the teacher. Okay. Now, let me show you what she said. I picked this text because Toni Morrison's writing can be fragmented, but she was known for her interesting way with words. Out of the parts of speech, the verbs are the most prominent, and then the nouns. Since nouns are instrumental to most writings, I thought it was interesting that the verbs in this excerpt from Beloved trump the nouns. Upon closer examination, it's clear that is because Toni Morrison was giving a noun, loneliness, a full-bodied character filled with action. Hence why the majority of the verbs used are in fact action verbs. Crossed, holding, smooths, contains, roams, spreading. In other words, the meaning of this excerpt is a metaphorical one, and it's strictly to breathe life into the noun, loneliness. Wow, talk about depth of analysis. And that's not the end. Let me show you what she did. This was written by my student. She has far to go. Listen, the flying in how love travels is a poisonous thing. It modulates through one's heart and invades the unsuspecting. It spins, giving the stomach a case of the flips, selfishly. It cries, moans, and beguiles the mind into calling it natural, assimilating to a box of chocolates or other pleasantries, although its strongest remnants flow through bodies possessively with anger. It shakes up the insides, drains the mind, turns someone into a shell. Love, a means for frivoling. Love is the cheating, the lying, the dark impostor underneath logic. Wow. I'm going to ask her for a copy of her first book when she publishes it. But what she has done here is to try to accentuate the verbs like Toni Morrison did, and even more of the nouns. And so what she finally did was to analyze it, and she saw that Toni Morrison used more verbs than nouns, and she used fewer fewer verbs, but the nouns really held the day, just like with Toni Morrison. Mentor texts are fabulous. You can use them in elementary school, what you're reading, and you look at the author's use of language, prepositional phrases. What is a prepositional phrase? And so you look at it in the book that you're reading in class, and your teacher guides you gently over the first few of them, and pretty soon the students can pick them out, and they can write with prepositional phrases the way their author did. And so mentor texts are wonderful. Now, here's something for you to do. Read aloud the following passage by Sean Ruday. He's a professor of teacher education at Longwood University. He's written 9 books on how to teach grammar in all different levels of education. And then write your own philosophy of using inclusive language using a similar style. So here, this is the abstract to an article that he wrote last year for our Assembly of Teachers of English Grammar journal. And I thought that it was useful because it talks about the different ways you can use inclusivity. So, inclusive language in the English classroom, recommendations for teachers. This manuscript provides English and literacy teachers with recommendations for making language instruction as inclusive as possible for students of diverse personal, linguistic, and cultural identities, experiences, and backgrounds. Address students in inclusive ways, first of all. Second, talk with students about issues of exclusion and inclusion in the English language. Third, study and discuss texts with linguistic variations. And fourth, create opportunities for students to apply linguistic variations in their own writings. Through these suggestions, the manuscript seeks to help teachers and teacher educators think about the importance of inclusive language in literacy instruction and to provide a foundation that can inform future conversations and studies on this subject. So do we have time for people to take 5 minutes and write it down? Oh, we've got plenty of time. Excellent.
Yes.
All
Yes, we
righty.
do.
So grab a piece of paper and write your own philosophy of inclusive language in your classroom. Use lots of verbs.
Unmute, unmute.
So let me know, BJ, when the 5 minutes is up.
I will. I put a timer in the chat box. So at every minute interval, I will put in a time watch for it. Sharon, please note the question in the chat box. Everyone, you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
More that I have to say. Okay, now I've got to find the chat box.
Everyone, you have 2 minutes remaining.
Maybe what I should do is just stop sharing. Okay. Now I've found the chat box.
You now have 1 minute to complete your assignment. Sharon, with 15 seconds remaining, will the participants be able to receive your slides?
Absolutely. I will be glad to give you a copy of the slides. And I know I broke the cardinal rule of PowerPoint technology by putting all that information on the slides, but I wanted you to have copies of everything. My students will be delighted that I was able to share their work with you. In fact, I'm going to put my slides and the recording on our Blackboard site, and I expect we'll have a wonderful discussion about it.
And the time is up, Sharon.
Great. So I'm calling for volunteers. Who would like to share what you have written? Because we're eager to begin this conversation. So what's the best way to do it? Shall we?
If you're able to raise your hand,
Okay.
please do so. If you're on camera, you can literally raise your hand, or you can raise the electronic hand.
Right.
Don't everybody volunteer at once. We do have your names and we can call you out.
I tell my students that there's no such thing as a wrong answer, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. Only the question that doesn't get asked. So please, let's talk.
Yeah, I put it in the chat, but I want to say it out loud.
Yes.
All right, here's what I put down.
Great.
Standard English grammar must be emphasized. To truly be inclusive, students must be able to use the most widely understood form of English.
Absolutely. And what we have found is that there's room to do both. And all of the concepts that we study in class, we look at prescriptively and descriptively. We talk about the grammar rules, and what we do is that we get inside them. You know, everybody has heard the controversy about whether you use sit or set or raise or rise. And the answer is, when you're talking in standard English, the answer is sit and rise and lie are intransitive verbs. They don't take a direct object, but set and raise and lay are transitive, and they have to have that noun to receive the action. And so we're talking about the grammar rules constantly. And my students at the end of the class, they have 3 tests on the content, but they have to have a final grammar project. And they either write a research paper, an argument about a grammar controversy, or they do 1 week's worth of lesson plans. And at that point, I urge them to write the things down and then go back and proofread. And so we talk about prescriptive grammar all the way through, but we just enlarge it to talk about descriptive as well. And my students at this point know which they are using when they answer a discussion board or whatever.
Sharon, we have a question. How do you address students in inclusive ways?
Oh, that's a good one. I think that what I try to do is to involve everybody in a group activity. We're all in this together, you know, and no one's opinion is superior to anybody else's. We're all here to learn and to share. And so I do tell them the right answer if they volunteer a wrong one, but just as a way to learn. And I say that if I had a penny for all of the mistakes that I've made in my life as a teacher and as a church organist, I would be a billionaire today. And so what I do is that I make an environment where it's okay to fail. It's okay to try, you know, because that's the way we learn, and it's okay to ask questions. So I guess that's the kind of inclusive environment that I try to capture. So
If you have
other
other
questions? Or
this is a
somebody
great
read
time.
what you said.
This is a
I had
great
a
time to put
comment
your
too.
questions in the chat box.
I had a comment, BJ.
Please.
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Saylor. My contribution is that I think that language also has to do with mannerism. More importantly, I mean, you can speak correct grammar, but the way it's being delivered and the undertone has to be to show respect, as you just said, in welcoming everyone's opinion and having individuals come together as a group. I think that that's a wonderful idea. And then when you go on to communicate, it's readily accepted by the parties that you're communicating with. And I think that it's certainly something that it's important we're aware of, because when we communicate, it doesn't only stay where we are, but it transcends us as we see. It impacts people, and it's often said back again. So I think that that's also important. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for saying that, because communication is vital to who we all are, and we can communicate that sense of respect. And I think this idea of purpose and audience as being the only judges of whether communication is correct or not is a very important concept to pass to the students. And, you know, just like in the words of the psalmist, to everything there is a season. So there's a time for the formal language, there's a time for informal language, and it's all good. You just have to choose which time and place is appropriate.
Sharon, as we prepare to wrap up our session at 1:50, there is a comment in the chat box that says we also need to make a distinction between written and spoken communication. Again, understanding our audience and our purpose.
Ah, that is very well said. There is a difference between written formal English, spoken formal English. Written informal English, like in the text, and spoken informal English. And so you have to know when you enter a room what kind of language you're going to be using. And, you know, there's this feedback in spoken English, either informal or formal, that gives you the clues as to what the meaning is. You don't have that feedback in written, either informal or formal language. And I tell my students, you have one chance to say it right and to communicate it when you write something down. And so that's the reason for all of the rules for the formal language, because we want to make sure that people don't misunderstand us. With the spoken English, we've got this dialogue. And so we can say, I think this. And then somebody says, do you really think that? You say, well, not quite, you know. And so you've got this feedback in conversation that you don't have in spoken language, even with text. So does anybody else have a comment before we finish our session and hurry to the next one?
Yes.
I am so thrilled that you came today. And how do we get copies of the slides to people? Do I ask for them to email me, or do we do it other ways?
We have the registration of everyone who registered for this class. And if you provide that your slides available to us, we will make sure that everyone gets them, or we'll be able to give you the email addresses of everyone who registered.
That sounds great.
Okay.
And then continue the lines of communication. Oh, here's a plug. Every Wednesday from 4 to 5:30 through the Writing Center, we've got something called Grammar Clinic, near and dear to my heart. It's about, oh my gosh, 12 years in the running. It's a free class, no tuition, no homework, no tests. It's learning for its own sake. We come and talk about language in the same depth that we do in linguistic grammar class. And it's such great fun. When Verna Teasdale was on campus, she came every grammar clinic. We have 12 during the semester. And the students knew her as Verna. You know? And so we had GED students, ESL students, teachers, and it's just a lovely way to talk about language. So if you're not doing anything this Wednesday at 4 o'clock, stop by a grammar clinic. Abby Barty, the Writing Center director, sends out advertisements every Wednesday. So please come. We're talking about fragments and run-ons this week.
Excellent. And I think, Sharon, we have reached that, Sharon and all of our attendees and participants, we have reached our time limit. I think this has been an excellent session. We certainly want to thank you all for attending. And Sharon, I will turn it over to you for your final words.
All righty. Well, the takeaway from this class is that language is amazing. There are so many facets of it. And when you figure out what your purpose in writing or speaking is and who your audience is, then you can choose the appropriate language. And this idea of inclusion begins with the words that we speak, you know, and the words we write down. And it's a beautiful way to show everybody that their ideas are just as important as everybody else's. And we will listen. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Please continue